Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Mound Science and Energy Museum Association Seminar Series. My name is Bob Bowman. I'm a member of the board and have the privilege of coordinating our seminar series. So tonight, I'm also very pleased to announce that our speaker is John Warrington. John's worked with our museum and stuff. He's actually very involved in the Miamisburg Historical Society. And if you read his biography, he's a native here with a lot of background, a lot of interest in our local history and events. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce John Warrington. He's going to talk to you about the Adena Indians and the collections of artifacts that his father collected. And John, it's yours.
All right. Thank you, Bob, and thanks to the Mound Cold War Museum for inviting me here tonight. My presentation is basically in two parts. The first part is going to be a slideshow based on the Adena culture in southwestern Ohio and as it relates to the Miamisburg Mound. And I want to make a full disclaimer here. Some of these slides, a lot of them were produced by my curator and former curator at the Miamisburg Historical Society, Gary Pettigrew and Larry Sutman. 7 years ago, we gave a similar presentation up here, so if you were here for that, you might see some of the same slides. The second part of my presentation is related to my father's collection of 35 years of Indian artifacts. And 30 years ago, when he passed, I became the caretaker of all his artifacts, which amounted to roughly under 900 items that he had collected in 35 years. And I have a sampling of those items up here on the table, after which my presentation, feel free to come up and look at. I have approximately 50 slides. I have the entire collection, and I'll go through those in the second half of the presentation. Also, I just want to tell you that I'm not a trained archaeologist, I'm not a geologist, I'm not an anthropologist. I'm a person who likes history. And I've grown up in Miamisburg, Ohio. We have a very unique culture here in this city. It's interesting that here we stand at the Mound Laboratories for 50 years, which was at the forefront of some scientific discoveries, marvels in technology. And right across the street, 3,000 years ago, our forefathers built a mound, which we still don't know how it was done. They moved a tremendous amount of earth somewhere because we've never found the excavation point for the soil. There's about 56 full-size swimming pool of soil on the mound. They estimate in terms of cubic foot. So it was quite an engineering feat. And there's still a lot of mystery surrounding that. So again, as I give my presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt or make a comment, or if I say something out of place, make me correct it. So we'll start at the beginning, and 450 million years ago, we were covered by an ocean here. If you know anything about the railroad cut just below us here at the mound, that is a great fossil repository. There's millions of years of geological time exposed there. But this whole area was covered in an ocean. And again, there was a series of several ice ages that moved across this area in successive waves. The last ice sheet began retreating here at about 12,000 years ago, and it left back behind it huge glacial deposits such as we see around Moraine, Ohio. The glacier advanced, they think, no further south than the Ohio River. Once the glacier started retreating and the growth of forests and vegetation occurred, animals started moving toward these climates, and that resulted in a source of food for herds of animals to feed on. And so man also followed these sources of food, and they became associated with this area. And eventually there were some hunting and trading routes established when the settlements were being formed. So here's sort of a timeline of humans emerging globally. And we have on the left side other places throughout the world, and the right side is North America. And you can see that in 10,000 BC, in areas of Turkey, there was advanced civilizations. The first recognized humans in the Americas emerged around 23,000 BC to 8,000 BC. And these were Paleolithic hunters, and they inhabited this area for a period of years up to about 8,000 BC. On the left side, 2000 BC, we have the formation of the Great Pyramids at Giza. And at the same time, roughly in the North American continent, we have the first recognized Americans, archaic hunting and gathering tribes occupying this part of the world. And then later on, 600 BC to 700 BC, we have the modern Roman Empire. And in the same time period in the North American continent, we have the later archaic Americans and the glacial cave cultures that are associated with this particular area. So the timeline of archaeological periods in Ohio are roughly these. And I've seen different dates associated with this, but the Paleo-Indian period was roughly 14,000 to 8,000 BC. Archaic period from 8,000 to 1,500 BC. The early woodland period was 1,500 to 1,000 BC. The middle woodland period is 700 BC to 550 AD, which is what we are talking about here for the Adenas. And the late woodland period, 500 AD to 1000 AD, associated more with the Mississippian and the Fort Ancient cultures. So we attribute how old man is and how long he's been here by examining carbon dating through physical evidence left behind at their sites. And that includes examination of campfires, broken bone, stone tools, skeletal remains of man and animal, pottery, earthworks, and burials. And really, the detective work regarding dating of these items didn't really begin until the 1950s, when there was radioactive carbon dating, carbon-14, which was a godsend, because then it put firm dates on material that was a living material. The Adena culture occupies the early woodland period and the middle woodland period. They're also referred to as the mound builders. And again, if we look at other places throughout the world and North America, we can see the Mayan civilization is emerging at this point in time, Mesoamerica, and we also have some King Solomon's Palace, Mount Moriah, and Jerusalem and Israel at this same period of time. In the Americas, this is the Adena Americans, the farmers, the artisans, the traders, and what we call the mound builders. Then we have the birth of Christ at year 0, following which in North America, 200 AD to 400 AD, this is what we attribute to the Hopewell Americans. And there's an overlap. There's discussion of whether the Adena and the Hopewell were one of the same tribes, or if they were split off from one another culturally or geographically. But there seems to be a consensus that these two groups, the Adena and the Hopewell, were sort of an intermingling group of people, and the Hopewell advanced with some additional tools and culture. At the bottom, 700 AD to 1200 AD is a transitional period and what's referred to as a cultural decline. There's a noticeable diminishing of skills, and in the tools used by Indians, it's kind of interesting that the older you go back in time, the more refined their material, spear points and so forth, their tools are. So I don't know whether that's attributed to the fact that they were starting to settle and domesticating plants and animals, and they didn't need to go out and hunt and gather as much, but the skill sets definitely fell off toward this period in time. And then we have the emergence 1200 AD to 1600 AD of the Fort Ancient group, which obviously down in Warren County, there's a very excellent site down there. Sunwatch in Montgomery County is an excellent Fort Ancient group site. And then we have the present modern day Indians, the historic Indians as they're referred to, the Seneca, Shawnee, Cherokee, Miami, and other tribes that occupied this area of Ohio. So there are some generalizations about the Adena we can make, and these include they had migration routes, obviously, from other areas of the continent. We theorize, or there is theory, that they came from Mexico and Central America. There's astonishing similarities between some of the artifacts of the South American and Mayan cultures and some of the Adena artifacts that have been found. We know also that the Adena lived in villages and that they were highly developed societies with rules, regulations, and ceremonial practices. They were food hunting, gathering, and first to practice agriculture, raising beans, sunflowers, corn, and tobacco. Customs, well, they were the first to build earthworks. And one across the street is a prime example, one of the best preserved earthworks of their time. They were skilled in pottery. A lot of pottery has been found at sites. And there is definitely evidence of trading over long distances with materials not native to this area. Specifically, I have some copper instruments up here. Copper is not native to southwestern Ohio, so that copper had to come generally from the northern part of Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, and that area. Mica, which has also been associated, some mica materials that were found in burial sites. Mica is not native to southwest Ohio. It generally comes from South Carolina and North Carolina. So those materials were traded from different cultures into this area. The burials, most were cremated, and there were burials in mounds, however, and some of those burials have been discovered. A lot of, unfortunately, a lot of burial mounds when the first settlers came into Ohio were done away with. They were excavated or plowed under. There wasn't any thought to the history of our ancestors. And at one time, the Ohio Historical Society estimates there were 10,000 burial mounds in Ohio, and fewer than 1,000 remain now that are protected. So there was quite a lot of destruction of their earthworks and mounds. The burials were generally reserved, or we think they were generally reserved for spiritual tribal leaders. They weren't generally for the regular people who occupied the villages. And the artifacts associated with the Adena followed the late archaic workmanship and tools, mostly stone and bone, but there is evidence of copper manipulation. I have some of that, and shells from other areas of the North American continent. So here's a map of the primary habitat of the mound builders, the early, middle, and late woodland periods. And you can see the Adena culture is this area in green. And the Hopewell culture is a smaller group area. And then the Fort Ancient culture overlaps all of it. And this map was provided by the Ohio Archaeological, or the Ohio History Connection. So what else do we know about the Adena? Well, we know some things, or we can speculate about their culture from the artifacts and tools left behind at their sites. We theorize that the Adena were hunters, gatherers, and gardeners. They hunted deer, elk, bear, wild turkey, rabbits, squirrels, and other animals with stone-tipped spears to provide food and clothing. How do we know, how can we identify these creatures? Well, we find remnants of their bones with the burial sites or with the settlements that they've been unearthed. They also hunted for birds, they fished, and they gathered freshwater mussels. They gathered nuts, acorns, hickory nuts, chestnuts, walnuts, berries, fruits like pawpaws and fox grapes, wild onion, and wild greens. Again, all these items have been found associated with some of the settlements. The picture here shows a device called an Atlatl, and this is a spear throwing device which is attributed to the Adena, and it's a very ingenious device to add inertia to a spear point. These people could throw a spear into an animal with their hands, but with the addition of a weight at the end of a fulcrum here, this would be launched, and this weight would actually slide, and it would cause 3 or 4 times more inertial energy when that was released into an animal. So it would penetrate very thick hides of mastodons. I mean, mastodons are more archaic, but of larger animals, because the hides are very, very tough. So this is I have some examples of some Atlatl weights here. They were in various shapes. This particular one here, I don't have it up here, but I'll show you an example of this type of Atlatl weight. What else do we know about the Adena from gardening and farming? Well, the Adena began growing a variety of plants in their gardens, including squash, sunflower, goosefoot, knotweed, and maygrass. This set of native plants often is referred to as the Eastern Agricultural Complex. The Ohio and Mississippi valleys were one of the only 7 regions in the world where people turned local plants into a basis of food-producing economies. And the consequences of this change is how people made a living was far-reaching, because they didn't have to, once they domesticated and learned how to process these foods, they didn't have to travel great distances. They could be self-sustaining. They didn't have to move around all the time. The plants that are described here are divided into 2 groups, oily and starchy categories. And the sunflower and sumpweed have an edible seed rich in oil. Erect knotweed and goosefoot have a leafy vegetable substance. They're starches, as are maygrass and little barley and other grasses that yield grains that could be made into a flour or a paste that they could eat. Here are some examples of wonderfully carved items from the Adena culture. A lot of these items these are found at the Ohio Museum in Columbus, run by the Ohio History Connection. And just a couple of items here. Here's the mica hand. These are all made of mica. Here is a piece of relief pottery that is, they think, used to imprint design on somebody's body. They could have put ochre or some sort of a dye on here and make it sort of like a tattoo. The skeleton over here shows the way that some of the early infants had their heads wrapped so that their heads were shaped oblong. And that's a cultural phenomenon that was also followed, that practice was followed in the Mayan and South American cultures too. They wrapped the forehead tight at birth so it became an oblong. It was a sign of status or some sort of ceremonial purpose. Here's another example. This is the famous Adena pipe. And again, it's very distinct. You notice the ear spools. This is very characteristic of the Mayan cultures. A lot of the reliefs and the effigy figures that the Mayans used also have this unique feature of the ear. Here are some gorgets and pendants. This is a pipe. This is a blade, a leaf-shaped blade. Here's some bone awls and tools. And here is another relief similar to the ones you would see in the Mayan culture. Here's the tablet I was referring to. The Adena carved these small tablets, usually 4 or 5 inches by width and length. And one or both sides were flat, and then they had a stylized, what they call a zoomorph or curvilinear geometric design in deep relief. So these were actually reliefed into the pottery. Paint has also been found on some of these tablets, leading archaeologists to propose that these stone tablets were probably used as a stamp design on cloth or animal hides or onto their own bodies. The Adena were very famous in producing pottery, and this particular pot is one that was found in Miamisburg, Ohio. It's on display at our Gephardt Tavern down in Heritage Village. It was found in a local farm, and this is very similar to the type of vessels that they use to either haul water or store food supplies in. They were actually made from grit or crushed limestone, and they were largely plain. They had some cord marks on them, some of them did. Some had handles, but most did not. The vessel shapes are what they call subconoidal or flat bottom jars, and sometimes with a small foot-like support so they wouldn't tip over. This jar, as mentioned, was found in a mound on Jamaica Road in Miamisburg, Ohio, and it was tempered with what they appear to be crushed freshwater mussel shells. Adena Shamanism. Again, this is all speculation because there's no written record of what these people practice as far as their religion or their culture. But the Adena Mounds are beautifully artistic achievements in themselves. They created personal items of art, either for themselves or for the tribal leaders. And many of the pieces associated with the Adena seem to revolve around a shamanistic practice, the transformation of humans into some type of animal. They particularly fashioned a lot of effigies for birds, wolves, bears, deer, and then they think that these people would transform back into human form. So this is what they speculate. Again, it's theoretical, but they believe that there was some sort of worship around this area. Pipes are often seen with these designs of animals. There are distinctive tubular smoking pipes with either a flattened or a block end mouthpiece, and they suggest that the offering of smoke was given to the spirits as some sort of a worship ceremony. But all told, the Adena seemed to be a manifestation of a broad region increase in the number and kind of artifacts devoted to spiritual need. So this might have been symbolic to their religion. This is an artist's rendering of an Adena ceremonial area. Dwellings were built on the outside of these enclosures, and they were sometimes loaf-like in shape or circular or oval shaped. And when Zachariah Hull came to Miamisburg in the late 1700s and built a fort down here at the river at Sycamore Creek, he noted in his diary that there was such a structure around the several areas of what is now downtown Miamisburg along the river, and it took in an area of several square blocks. So this earthen mound was about 5 feet in height, and there was a single opening into it. So they think that this might have been a ceremonial site, but there was no evidence of any dwellings or any buildings within that enclosure. And here is the drawing, as I made a reference to. This is the Miami River. This is the Sycamore Bridge, or 725. Here's Linden Avenue going across the river. And this earthwork took in this whole area of downtown Miamisburg. And what happened to it? I've heard people say that the earth was actually taken down. Some of it was used for bricks in creating bricks for the early parts of Miamisburg. They don't know. So, again, it's just a tale. Here's an artist rendering of what an Adena home and village might have looked like based on remnants that have been found at sites. The closest thing I could say, if you've ever been to Sunwatch Village, Sunwatch is an excellent preservation site managed by the Boonshoft Museum, and they have reproductions of these dwellings there. Really, really interesting. So what do we know about our great mound in Miamisburg, Ohio? Well, these are the men that played a prominent role in preservation of the Miamisburg Mound. Starting from the left, Dr. John Treon. He was the first landowner that possessed the land that the mound was on. Edwin Davis and Ephraim Squire. These were people who were interested in preserving and looking at the early archaeology of the mounds in Ohio, and they documented the Miamisburg Mound back in 1851. The man on the right, Charles Kettering, he eventually purchased the mound from the Treon family in order to protect it from getting destroyed. So he was very, very aware of the history of this area, and he's responsible for preserving it. Here's an early known rendering of the mound. This is dated 1835, and you notice the mound has trees located on it. This is the Treon farm, and there were cattle that grazed around the base of it. Here's another representation of the mound. This is Davis and Squires' rendering of the mound that was published in the Smithsonian publication in 1851. And again, notice there's some trees on it, the farm buildings, and there was a fence located around the base of it. So as I mentioned before, Charles Kettering purchased the mound from the descendants of the Treon family and preserved it. And it remained in the family for over 100 years once they settled here. But Kettering in turn deeded it to the Ohio Historical Society, which made it into a park, which it is today. The Ohio History Connection and Miamisburg share in the upkeep and the maintenance of the mound park today. This is a plaque that was erected at the shelter at the base of the mound, and it just tells a little bit about the size and the early excavation that took place in 1869. Here's some other mounds, very, very similar in size and shape to that of the Miamisburg Mound. This is the Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia, and it's the only other North American mound that's conical in shape and similar in size to the Miamisburg Mound. At one time in the early 20th century, there was an observatory on the top of this mound that was taken down. But it has been preserved, and there's an excellent park and museum located next to this mound. The Cokia Mounds in Illinois are an example of the Mississippian culture, which came later, and the Cahokia were the largest city attributed to the Mississippians. These are called step mounds, and these are very similar in size and in form to the mounds that are found in Central and South America, the Mayans, the Toltecs, and some of the South American tribes. They, along with the Fort Ancient culture, flourished from about 800 AD until about 1600 AD, and this was bringing the Native American mound builders era to the Adena, which was 1800 BC to the end. Here's the Serpent Mound. Who really built the Serpent Mound along Brush Creek in Adams County? Well, this mound, this effigy mound, was attributed to the Hopewell culture, but there's a question about that depending on who you talk to, because there has been later excavations that suggest that this mound actually might have been attributed to the Adena culture earlier. So this is a very interesting site if you've never been there, the Serpent Mound. Other mounds and earthworks attributed to the Adena in our area. This is the Enon Mound, which is north of us in Clark County. It's a smaller mound, and it has been preserved and protected. Here is an Indian mound in the Plains, Ohio, which is located near Athens, and it's pretty oddly shaped. It's very high. It's not as conical as the mound in Miamisburg, but it has been preserved. Here's one right down the street. This is the Kinder Mound that's located off Deerdorf Road in Franklin, Ohio, and you can see the outline of the mound here. This is not really a great picture, but here is the mound, and this has been now protected site. And it used to be private property, but I'm not sure. Bob, maybe you can tell me. Who owns this now? Is it Warren County or?
I think it's the state of Ohio.
State of Ohio took it over? Yeah.
Took it over somehow.
Okay. And that is a well-preserved mound. It's never been, I don't think it's ever been excavated. No one's ever gone into it. And then in Carlisle, there's another earthwork that is referred to as Fort Carlisle, and this is in the Metro Park off of Germantown. And this picture is a aerial view of an outline where this is the earthwork that covered it. Here's Twin Creek, and this is quite a high area overlooking Twin Creek. And then here the mound is in this particular area, I think, or is it over here? Maybe it's that point where there's a small mound located. So that's the Adena culture, and the next part of my presentation is the one related to my own father and his collection of Adena artifacts. And this is a picture of my father, John Warrington, and he was a collector of artifacts for roughly 40 years, beginning in the late 50s up till his passing in 1990. And I'll tell you a little story about him. We grew up on a farm across the river, which was, we knew, a known habitation for early Indians. And my father would walk the fields when my grandfather would plow. We'd find pieces and bits of Indian relics once in a while. Not very often would you find a full piece. But he was curious about the history of the Indians. But he began working for a school district in southern Dayton in 1959 as a custodian and a master carpenter. And the first year that he worked for this school district, they were ordered to clean the building out at the high school. There was a whole remnant of lockers, chairs, and miscellaneous things that had been stored down in this basement. So my father and all the other custodians went down there and they started cleaning out this material and dumping it into a dumpster. Well, back in the recesses, they found 4 or 5 bushel baskets of what appeared to be nothing but rocks. And my dad and these other guys dragging this stuff out, and they put it next to the dumpster. And my dad just went over, unwrapped, it was all newspaper, unwrapped it. Here was a 3/4 grooved axe. And then he started out unwrapping a few other things. Here was spear points. Here were banner stones. Here were gorgets. And he knew something was up because they were all numbered. It had to be a collection. So he didn't do any more. He went to his supervisor and he asked if he would be allowed permission to take this home instead of putting it in the dumpster to go to the landfill. And his supervisor said, yeah, they're nothing but rocks. So he got his other custodian buddies, they loaded up the Plymouth, 4 or 5 bushel baskets, and when he got home, it took 2 weeks to unearth everything. He had 250 items of museum quality Adena artifacts that he saved out of a dumpster. He didn't know what he had, and he and my mom, who were just befuddled by what they found, they knew it was something special, but they had no idea what the stuff was. So they started researching it, and they started contacting the Ohio Historical Society. They went to the Dayton Library. They went to places where they could find reference books. And the more they dug into it, the more fascinating it became. And he, at that point, became a real avid collector. So the artifacts that he collected, in 2015, I contacted Cowan's Auction House in Cincinnati, Ohio, which Wes Cowan, if any of you watch the Antique Roadshow, he's often seen there doing appraisals on different Americana items. And he was supposed to come to my house and authenticate some of these items. I had no idea whether they were reproductions or what. But I had two other individuals, Danica Fenard and Charlie Wagers, came in, who are archaeological consultants who make authenticity of items at Cowan's auction. And they spent 5 hours looking over my dad's collection. And there was 900 pieces there. They determined only 4 items out of the 900 to be suspicious in either being reproductions or reworked pieces, which was quite astonishing. They graded some of the artifacts as museum quality, others as one of a kind. They'd never seen any of these before, ever. And Charlie Wagers, who's I have met several times and I visited his house, he has one of the most extensive Indian artifact collections in the United States. He has over 19,000 artifacts in his house. It is the most astonishing thing. I mean, his house is a museum. It just took my breath away. I spent 3 or 4 times in his house and I didn't see half of it. It was just amazing. But anyhow, I was invited to go to a Cowan's auction. They said, well, you need to be coming down to see some of these Indian artifact auctions. So I started going down there a few times, and I just shook my head at the prices that they were getting for some of these items. It just amazed me, you know. A couple spear points, $4,000 or $5,000. A banner stone, $15,000. Birdstones going for $20,000 and $30,000 a piece. I mean, I just couldn't get over it. It just blew my mind. So having been there and seen this, I gained a great appreciation for what my dad did and trying to put together a really nice collection. These are the pictures of the people I referenced. Wes Cowan on the left, Charlie Wagers, and Danica. And I have met them quite a few times since they came up to the house. So here are slides of my dad's collection. I have some representative samples up here, and I'll just start and I'll go through them quickly. I'm watching my time here, but these are spears and blades, archaic period, 8,000 to 1,500 BC. These are large paleo points, archaic and woodland periods, 12,000 to 800 AD, various time periods. These are more spears and blades, different varieties of flints. And I also want to tell you, as we're going through this, that my father, he was not an archaeologist. He never went out and dug any sites. Most of this stuff, aside from the things that he salvaged from the school, were items that he traded for at flea markets. Now this is going on in the 1960s and the 70s. Flea markets are very popular, and he would go to gun and knife shows. And a lot of the people at gun and knife shows also dealt in artifacts. And my dad established a network of people, and they knew what he was looking for. So sometimes they would look for things for him when he would visit them, and then they would trade something. It was usually not cash involved. It was usually a barter. My dad was a weapons collector. He collected Civil War rifles, World War I, World War II military stuff. He often traded guns for Indian relics. I mean, it was just, there wasn't cash involved. It was just basically trust that you were getting something of value in exchange for something else. Here's some knives and scrapers, some monoliths. These are very sharp right here. You could cut hides with those. They're extremely sharp. Here's some drill points of flint and chert. These are Paleo and woodland eras. Amazing that they could use these stone tools to drill holes into bone or into other stone. And these people, even though they didn't have a knowledge of, a scientific knowledge, they knew what materials a drill would work in. I mean, over time, over thousands of years, or tens of thousands of years, they learned what could and could not work in drilling. Here's some dovetail and early Archaic period convex points. This is a especially nice piece right here. That's about 4 inches long. These are leaf shape points, 1 to 3 inches in length. Here's some smaller points. These are all periods: Paleo, Indian, Archaic, Woodland. Some of these are interesting, the way they're notched. Going back too fast here. Some of the notching on these. And I don't know all the nomenclature, the different types of notches. My parents tried, when they were putting these collections together, they tried to put them in display cases that they felt would preserve and protect these items from rubbing against each other. That was one of the things they were told by other people. They said, don't put them next to each other. Separate them, whatever you use, cotton or some material that'll keep them from clanging together. You don't want to chip them. These, I have this particular display up here. These are very deeply notched and finely serrated Archaic period points. These are really interesting pieces, and there had to be an artisan to make those. This one's from Miami County here, and some of them are identified also. These are sandy shoulder points, and these are very old points. They're based on their shape. Here's some other smaller points, different types of flints. These are rose and red flints, and of different size, different length. Here's some gemstones. These are made out of quartz and what they call rock candy quartz. They're clear, like these right here. And then this one's an obsidian point. That's a very small point there. Now here's some Adena points really associated with the Adena. The bottom rows are what they call a Gary type. These particular notches here. They have a wide stem. Here are some scrapers and some turkey tail points, early Archaic. They're called Thebe points, the way they're base notches. Uh-oh, what happened? Here are some medium-sized points from all periods. And again, you'll notice all the points, all the items that my dad collected are not pieces. They are complete pieces. He was very, I guess, methodical, and when he got something, he didn't want something that had been chipped or deformed or reworked. And he had a really discerning eye when these people from Cowens came up and said, yeah, what you have here is the real deal. My dad might have got fooled a few times, but he didn't get fooled very often. He knew what he was looking at. And I guess that came from many, many years of just having a feel for what looked right and what didn't look right. Here are some side and corner notched Archaic period points. Here's some triangular points. These are interesting. I don't know how they were fitted on the shaft of a spear, but there had to be a way that they were attached. Some broad points, Paleo to Archaic period. Here are two of his best spear points. These are Archaic spears. I have them up here if you want to look at these. They're basically in unbelievable condition, and the one is a bicolor. This one right here, it's got a unique shading to it. These are 5 to 2.5 inches in length.
Excuse me.
Yes?
Could you tell from the years that they all look like always that same shape, but the difference is from here and where it did progress?
Yeah. Yeah, there are different shapes associated with different time periods. And, you know, I don't know, again, I'm not an archaeologist, but I know that there are definite, like the serrated pieces that I showed up here, that's associated with a particular time period, and then you don't see them again. So I don't know whether they changed, design based on what worked and what didn't work. And also a lot of these items were probably traded. So they may have come from great other distances not associated with this area. So there is evidence of lots of trading going on between groups of peoples. And there's evidence that some of these cultures had points where they would leave a deposit of spear points, what they called cache points, and then another tribe would come and get them and then leave their stuff. So they had a trust, they obviously had some sort of a mechanism of trust where they would trade one thing for another item and then go back to their respective areas. I want to point this out. This is one of the items that was suspicious when Cowans came up. They said that they called this the gray ghost. And I guess there was a Flint napper in the 1950s who went around the country selling fake spear points. And a lot of them were very large in size. And Charlie Wager said, yep. He said, that is a gray ghost. That is a reproduction point. He said, it's just too clean. There's the way the flint napping on the pattern of it on the flint. He said, that's not correct for the time period. And he said, so what you have there is a real nice looking fake. Here's some old pieces, Paleo, Clovis, Dalton, and Folsom points. These go back many, many thousands of years. And this one is suspicious too. This one is about 6 inches in length. And again, they said, the fluting on this is just too good. It just, it doesn't look right. The other items, they said, appear to be authentic. This one, they said, may not be. I mentioned the Atlatl. Well, these are the weights associated with the spear of the Atlatl. These are called banner stones, and most of the banner stones used by the Adena were made of banded slate. And banded slate was attributed to the glacial period when the glacial repeated. It left deposits of this particular stone and slate. It was easily shaped, and it could be drilled in very easily with sticks and sand. So these are Atlatl weights. I have a few up here. Here's some other types. They're called prismodial, ipsilodial, tubular, I'm not sure how that's geniculate, and ball types. And these are all drilled. They fit on a shaft. They slid down the shaft when the person threw the spear. So it gave them additional inertia, energy. Here's some gorgets and pendants. Now I want to point out, you notice the numbers on some of these banded slate. These are the items that my father recovered from the high school basement. These are the ones he found in the bushel basket. If you go back here, you notice all of them have numbers. These are the items that he discovered in the bushel basket. Priceless pieces. And they were wrapped up really well. The newspaper print went back to the 1930s. So they had been in this basement for over 30 years when he found them. Never been touched. And the other thing, going back to this story, my father attended this school as a high school student, and he never remembered seeing any of these items on display. So somebody in this community left the school system a wonderful collection, and no one ever knew that it was displayed. It probably just got pushed aside down in the basement and was never seen again. And it could have ended up in a landfill. These are very interesting pendants, various shape. This bone fish hook is unique. Again, banded slate. I have these particular shovel type gorgets and keyhole gorget. I have those up here if you want to look at these closer. These are made, this one's made of sandstone. These are made of banded slate. I also have these here. This some of the bone tools, scrapers, awls, picks, drilled teeth, claws from animals they used for ornaments. These are gaming stones here. They're not sure. The Adena played some sort of game with stones. They don't know what the purpose of it, how the game was done, but they think that it was attributed to some sort of game. Here are gorgets, 2-hole drilled and quadriconcave and biconcave keyhole and boat-shaped styles. The Adena and glacial came times. Again, these are the items that were in the bushel basket. They're all numbered. Somebody had carefully documented them. And the holes are really, really drilled well. You'll see some of these up here if you want to look at them closer. I didn't bring these with me, but these are larger banded slate gorgets. These are very interesting pieces. The people from Cowens, when they came up, said, wow, those are unusual. They had never seen one, especially drilled like this one is with 4 holes along the edge, called a meat cleaver.
Did they know what those were used for?
Again, it's all theoretical, but apparently the holes were used to put leather, and they were used as an ornament, maybe as a status. A gorget, the literal French name for gorget, is a throat protector. They were used to ward off somebody, striking a blow against the neck. But these pendants probably hung lower. The gorget might have been around the neck and tied with string or some sort of leather or animal tissue. Again, that's theoretical. They don't know because it's just based on what they think it was used for. Here's a 15-inch strand of clamshell beads. Yes, I brought that one with me here. These are really interesting items. These are butterfly-shaped banner stones. One is drilled. The one, number 350, this is drilled through, which would have been attached to an Atlatl spear. This one is fluted. It's not drilled through, and I'm not sure how that would have been instrumental in using as a Atlatl weight. But these are very rare and in extremely good condition. There's no flaws on them or abrasions or anything. And this one is the prize. When my father discovered these items from the school district in 1961 or 62, my father contacted Dr. Raymond Bobby, who at that time was curator of the Archaeological, Ohio State Archaeological and Historical Society. And he sent him a Polaroid picture of several of these items. And when this curator got a hold of these pictures, he called my father and he said, I would like to come down and see them myself. And so he made arrangements, and this gentleman came down and spent a couple hours. This is a story my mom told me. Spent a couple hours just looking over this stuff. And he said, this stuff is museum stuff. He said, don't ever get rid of it. Don't, just protect it and keep it as best as you can. But he said these things are just priceless. I've seen a banner stone like this at Cowens go for $10,000. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Here's another thing, the fragment of cloth. This was found in those baskets. And this is a cloth woven from animal hair that was located, so the note goes, located next to copper, which preserved it in a grave site or in a burial area. I don't know if it was a grave site, but anyhow, it was located next to copper, which preserved the animal tissue. And that's sandwiched between glass right now. Here's some cones, discoidals, made from sandstone. Again, they don't know the purpose of what these were for. I have several of them, but they're in really good shape. There's no abrasions or breaks in them. And these go for quite a lot of money too. These are cones, loafs, gaming stones, pottery shards. Here's the prize. The top is a banded slate birdstone from Huron County, Ohio. It's called a Popeye Birdstone because it has, the eyes are in relief. This particular part of the birdstone was cracked at the neck, and my dad got it from a collector. It had been put together. The break was very clean. And so they cemented it together. You can barely see the break, but it was broken. This birdstone, on the other hand, number 355, this one, is in perfect shape. And here's another, what do they call that? Crescent banner stone. Here's a pipe, and this is a beaked bird effigy made out of sandstone. And it's very unique that the eye is as large as it is. Again, they could have put animal hide or something through that and wore it as an ornament. These are closer views of the items. Birdstones are, again, one of the most prized possessions of the people of the Adena culture, and they think that because some of these are in such great condition, they were ceremonial. They were used as ceremonial pieces and not used in the actual hunting process, because they represented obviously a bird. And again, these were also authenticated by Dr. Bobby at the Ohio State Archaeological Society. Here's a close-up of that bird beak effigy. These are two views of the 355 banded slate birdstone. And the holes are drilled in the front and the rear. You notice that there's a hole here and a hole here that exits. That's why they don't think this was a proper functioning Atlatl weight. They think it's ceremonial. This is the Popeye Birdstone, a little bit different view. And I think you can see the break right here along the neck. There it is, a little bit better. And that's roughly 4.5 inches. Here's some Adena pipes. These are sandstone or abandoned slate. I brought one up here that's made of, I think it's number 318 up here. They smoked tobacco. They had pipes. Some of them are interesting. This is an odd-shaped pipe here. Here's some Paleo Flint tools. These are called adze or hoes or whatever they were used for, agricultural. Here are some archaic blades, scrapers, monoliths. These are made of yellow flint, and a lot of this are marked from Tennessee. Here's some other mid-sized spear points. Watching my time here. Some more points. More spear points. Here's the copper. I have the copper up here. This is what they think is a breastplate because there's 2 holes in it. And it's pretty small. These people were smaller in stature than us. They estimate anywhere from 5 feet 2 inches average height. So they were pretty small people, but they must have been very sturdy. All these copper items probably came from Michigan, the upper Great Lakes area, and were fashioned into spear points. These are, what do I want to call them? Bracelets. Here's some celts of the late and mid-woodland period. I have 1 or 2 celts up here. These are all made of granite and hardstone. Here's some larger celts, and you can see the size of them. They're anywhere from 7 to 8 inches in length. There's some grooved axes. Again, some of these axes were found in the bushel baskets because they're numbered. And these weigh 3.5 pounds each. These people had to be really brutes to handle this stuff. I mean, they're not light. Pestles, hand mauls, these were used for grinding corn, maize, weeds, whatever they were making paste out of. Here's a gouge, a scraper. This is 10 inches long, and there's an indentation. Let me go back. There's an indentation right here. This is all grooved out or dug out. Here's some more axes, 3/4 and full grooved axes. And some of the items, this I think my dad traded for this piece. This came out of the bushel basket cache. These are pestles, what they call rolling pin pestles, like a rolling pin. And here's a grindstone with an indentation in the middle that was used as a grindstone. Here's some hammer stones, boat stones. This is a triangular boat stone made out of granite. Here's some shell pendants. I have that up here. These are made out of abalone. There's earrings here, and these are pendants. Here's another rolling pin pestle. And here's a huge celt. This thing weighs 8 pounds, and that is a monster to move around. Again, that was found in the bushel basket of artifacts. Here's another one weighing 6 pounds. And I didn't carry any of this stuff up here with me. And here's some more axes. And again, more axes. And another big axe. That one's 8.5 inches in length. And then here's some local items. I mentioned that my dad would walk the fields and find things. These are items that which he found in the fields over off 725 where my grandfather had a farm. One of the things that you all need to be aware of, there is an archaeological society in Dayton called Miami River Chapters. And it's the local Archaeological Society chapter for the state of Ohio. There's a gentleman, Mike Diano, who lives in Miamisburg, and I've not met him yet, but I plan on meeting him. But this is a site that, if you're interested, you might want to check them out if you want to pursue any more interest in collecting and so forth. And now that's the end of my presentation. This is a picture of the entrance to the Miamisburg History Center. I have about 300 items at this time in display at the History Center, and I hope to rotate some of the items that you saw, the 900 items, in and out of there just to keep it interesting. So with that, I'm finished, and do you have any questions or comments that I can answer for you? Again, I'll try my best, but I'm not an expert. I'm just a lover of history.
Let me thank John first.
Yep.
But I was probably with some off Maui small ones.
Well, I'm sure you've heard of Indian Trace, which is right off of 75 over off Alex Road. There's condominiums over there now. It overlooks 75 going into West Carrollton. There were the Lyons family, who were early settlers of Miamisburg, prominent family. There were quite a few mounds over there. Small mounds, burial mounds. There was, my father swore that there was a small burial mound on my grandfather's farm that was about 3 feet in it was definitely not, it was man-made. It was not natural, and it was stood out in the middle. So there's a lot of different mounds. There's a mound in Middletown, I think. There's several mounds there. And, you know, there's speculation, was this a mound for burial or is it a mound for signaling? Because as high as this is, you can look 10 miles in almost any direction and see, you know, up into Dayton. You can see all the way down to Middletown. You can see all the way to Germantown. So it stands to reason, why would they build a mound on this high of a prominent area? It had to be other than burial. It had to be signaling or, you know, communication of some sort, or it could have been a status symbol. It could have been like a skyscraper. You know, I got a bigger mound than you guys have. I don't know. It's all theoretical because there's no written history.
There's no history, there's no documentation. And,
right.
And the small mounds that were there probably have been dug up or just and
plowed under. Yeah. I mean, there's no sense of history. The farmers that came here in the 1700s, 1800s, they're not interested in mounds. They're interested in agriculture. That was just a nuisance for them. They just plowed it under.
Yeah, I've been to that Fort Carlisle that you showed, and I wondered, is that Adena or is that Fort Ancient or what?
Well, Bob probably can address that better than I can. He's physically been there.
I've physically been there Two.
Yeah.
I fell down in mud a couple times
Yeah.
while walking around. I think it's attributed to the Hopewell culture, similar to Fort Ancient, rather than the Adena. But again, there's no real documentation. You know, there's stories like there were actually a stone mound, and the stone got taken and used to put in barn, you know, for a barn. Because a guy said, here's a big kind of cut stone. I can use a whole bunch of these and build my barn instead of doing that. And there was no one to do that. So again, there's speculation. One of the most difficult thing is dating it. You know, they kind of correlate by what you have there. Now, you know, you had a piece of cloth, which in principle could allow carbon-14 dating.
Right.
And the techniques are now using small samples. Years ago, you'd have to have a fairly large sample to get a, but I think now
You
there's
just need a little bit of
a little
material
bit
from
material.
a tooth or.
And so, but that will help. But there's, you know, DNA tests will maybe link some, but those are newer techniques than what was collected. Other questions out here? You certainly want to do that. But I had one. You were saying point, spear point.
Mm-hmm.
Were there not bows and arrows at this time?
No.
So these people were always some kind of.
Bows and arrows don't show up in this culture until the modern Indians. You know, if you look, when the settlers first came to the colonies in the early 1600s and 1500s, when they ran into the indigenous tribes of people along the coastline, those people had bows. There's pictures or drawings of, you know, people with a bow and an arrow of some sort, but there's never been a bow or arrow associated with the Adena or Hopewell.
I mean, there
culture
would.
either.
They could have rotted the stone, but
Yeah.
still, the points are pretty small. So either they were small sticks for thrusting for small animals or whatever. Any other final questions? If not, let's thank John again. And when you have an opportunity, go down to the Miamisburg History Society and check at what he has there too, because they got more displays.
Yeah, I mentioned Cowan's auction, and I brought with me about 3 different catalogs of items that you can see pictures of similar items that were on the slideshow or here. And some of them I have actual values, what were bidded on those items. It's totally bizarre. I mean, people had a lot more money than I did. You'd sit there, and they were bidding all over the world. There would be 15 people on computers and phone lines when I'd go to these auctions, and they literally would fill. There would be 100 people in sight at the auction house, and maybe thousands on phones calling in bidding on things. I mean, it just blew my mind.
I tried that on not on one of these objects, something else, and it's difficult to win. You got to be razor fast. Something I wanted, somebody else bid, and then I said, "Oh, wait," and then somebody else bid right after that,
Yeah.
and then it closed out, and you were done. So,
Yeah,
I guess it's a game you have to develop some skill at.
Yeah, and I never took a bid card because I would be scratching my head and I'd probably end up owning a $5,000 bid. I didn't want to do that, so I never bid. I was just there curious because I wanted the material, the catalogs for reference, so I could go through and see, and there was good descriptions. The other problem with my dad's collection is there's no provenance. You know, the value of something is having a history associated. When my father was collecting this, there's no history associated with what he bought. Or, you know, if he would have kept a record of saying, well, this came from Enon, Ohio, this came from Springfield, or, he didn't do that. Yeah. And that takes away the value, but it's still, I mean, it's...
The artifacts are there.
They're there.
And
Yeah.
they've been authenticated as being realistic, but what they have to a particular assignment is not there.
Right.
So
if you have the provenance, that just adds tremendous value to the artifact.
let me make an announcement. Our next seminar will be in May, and I think it's May 25th, 23rd, whatever. It's a Wednesday night, 4th Wednesday of the month. And our speaker is going to be Mike Lawrence from the Dayton History. So I know Mike could show up today. There he is, our speaker. I haven't met him, and he's going to talk about inventions from Dayton inventors. So it's a little different story, but still about things that happen in Dayton. So please come next month, and I'm glad you all came tonight, and please check out what...
Thank you very much. Appreciate your... Thanks.